I was 19 when Daniel Reed called me into his room, not a classroom, not a school office, but his apartment. Weeks after graduation had stripped us of titles and timetables. By then, he was no longer Mr. Reed, and I was no longer a student trying to sit straighter when he entered the room. On paper, the distance between us was legal and clean. In my chest, it was anything but. The message arrived late in the evening, brief and careful, as if every word had been weighed. Ethan, if you're still in town, come by tomorrow. I think we should talk. No emojis, no explanation. Just his name glowing on my screen, stirring a familiar unease that felt too sharp to be nostalgia. Daniel had been my literature teacher for 2 years, measured, observant, the kind of man who listened as if silence itself were a language. He never crossed lines, never lingered too long, yet I had always felt seen in his presence. Now, with school behind us, that sense of being noticed returned with unsettling clarity. I spent the night arguing with myself. I told myself it was harmless, that teachers met former students all the time. I reminded myself that I was an adult now, free to make my own decisions. Still, when I stood outside his apartment building the next evening, my hands were cold despite the summer heat. Daniel opened the door himself. He looked different without the pressed shirts and polished shoes, softer, almost. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ethan," he said, stepping aside to let me in. His apartment was neat in a way that felt practiced, like a place kept orderly to control something else. Books lined the walls, familiar titles I remembered from class. The space smelled faintly of coffee and something sharper, cologne, maybe. Or restraint. We sat across from each other, an invisible line stretching between the couch and the chair. Daniel folded his hands, then unfolded them, as if unsure where to place them. "I wasn't sure if I should ask you to come," he said. But I didn't want to leave things unsaid. The word things hung heavily. I nodded, afraid that if I spoke too quickly, I'd reveal more than I intended. He studied me the way he always had, carefully, thoughtfully, but now there was something else layered beneath it. Fatigue, loneliness. I realized then that Daniel Reed, the man who had once seemed immovable, was quietly coming undone. "I want to be clear," he said. "You're not my student anymore. You don't owe me anything." "I know," I replied, though my voice betrayed my nerves. He exhaled, relieved. "Good, because what I need to say, it's personal." That was when he mentioned Marcus, his partner of nearly a decade. The name came with a pause, as if Daniel expected it to sting. He didn't offer details, only that things had been strained for a long time, that conversations had thinned into logistics, and affection had become an afterthought. "I feel invisible in my own home," he admitted quietly. I shouldn't have leaned forward, but I did. I shouldn't have felt the pull of recognition, but it was there, raw and undeniable. For the first time, I saw Daniel not as an authority figure or a mentor, but as a man carrying a private ache. "I didn't call you here to burden you," he said quickly, almost defensively. You always listened. Even when you didn't speak. The room seemed to shrink around us. I became acutely aware of the distance between our knees, the way his gaze lingered before pulling away. My heart beat faster, not with fear, but with the dangerous clarity of being understood. "I used to think about you," I said before I could stop myself. "After class," not in a way I could explain. Daniel looked at me then, really looked at me, and something unspoken passed between us. Not permission, not a promise, just truth. He stood and walked to the window, his back to me. "That's exactly why we need to be careful," he said. I knew then that this conversation was not an ending. It was an opening, quiet, deliberate, and impossible to close without consequence. The silence that followed felt deliberate, as though Daniel Reed was testing whether restraint could still hold. He remained by the window, watching the street below, while I sat frozen on the couch, replaying my own words with mounting unease. I had said too much, yet not enough to retreat. "I shouldn't have asked you here," Daniel said at last, without turning around. His voice carried the weight of someone who had rehearsed this moment and still failed to master it. "But pretending nothing exists hasn't been working either." He faced me again, arms crossed, not defensively, but as if he were keeping himself intact. Up close, I noticed the fine lines around his eyes, the quiet exhaustion etched into his expression. This was not the man who once commanded a classroom with calm authority. This was someone unsure of his footing. "I need you to understand something," he continued. Whatever happens, or doesn't, has to come from clarity, not confusion. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. Then tell me what this is. Daniel hesitated, choosing honesty with care. He spoke of Marcus again, more fully this time. Of shared routines that had replaced intimacy. Of years spent avoiding difficult conversations in the name of stability. We coexist, he said. We don't connect. There was no bitterness in his tone, only resignation. I found myself wondering how long loneliness could exist inside a relationship before it began searching for witnesses. I'm not asking for sympathy, Daniel added. And I'm not asking you to fix anything. Then why me? The question escaped before I could soften it. He met my gaze, unflinching. Because you see people as they are, not as they pretend to be. You always did. The admission unsettled me. I had spent years believing my feelings were one-sided, a quiet infatuation born of proximity and imagination. Hearing him acknowledge a connection, however cautiously, shifted something inside me. I thought it would fade, I said. After graduation, after distance. And did it? Daniel asked gently. I shook my head. It sharpened. That earned a faint, pained smile. Daniel sat down across from me again, closer this time, though he kept his hands folded tightly in his lap. That's where the danger is, he said. Because feelings don't care about timing. Or consequences. The word consequences lingered between us. I understood what he meant. Marcus existed, even if unseen. So did the past we shared, however redefined it now was. I don't want to be a mistake, I said quietly. Daniel's expression softened. You wouldn't be. But I don't want to be hidden either. That stopped him. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly, as if acknowledging a truth he could no longer ignore. I can't offer you certainty, he admitted. Only honesty. And boundaries. He reached for a glass of water, then thought better of it, leaving it untouched. Nothing physical, he said. Not while I'm still trying to understand what I'm doing to the people involved. There was relief in that boundary, even as disappointment threaded through it. The tension between us was no longer hypothetical, it was named, constrained, and therefore heavier. Then what are we doing? I asked. Daniel considered the question carefully. We're acknowledging something that exists, he said, and deciding not to lie about it. I stood, needing space to breathe. The room felt charged, every familiar object transformed by what had been spoken aloud. When I turned back to him, I realized how close we had come to crossing a line simply by standing still. I should go, I said. Yes, Daniel agreed, though neither of us moved right away. At the door, he paused. Ethan, he said, if this becomes too much, you have every right to walk away. I looked at him then, at the man who had taught me how to read between lines, now standing inside one of his own. So do you, I replied. As I stepped into the hallway, I understood that restraint was not resolution. It was merely the calm before a choice that neither of us could avoid for long. I told myself I wouldn't go back. That the conversation we'd had was enough, an admission, a boundary, a warning. Yet days later, when Daniel Reed's name appeared on my phone again, restraint felt less like strength and more like avoidance. Are you free tonight? No explanation. No apology. Just an opening. I arrived after sunset, the city quieter than it had been before, as if even the streets understood the gravity of return. Daniel answered the door with a look that suggested he had been standing behind it for some time. There was no small talk this time, no cautious circling. We moved into the living room like people resuming a conversation paused mid-sentence. I thought about not messaging you, Daniel said, his voice low. So did I replied. About not coming. He nodded, accepting the symmetry. Marcus is away for the weekend. The statement was factual, not an invitation, but it shifted the air between us. The absence of a third presence made room for what we had been deliberately ignoring. We sat closer than before. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel warmth radiating from him. Daniel spoke first, as if determined to remain honest even while drifting toward danger. I keep telling myself that naming a feeling is different from acting on it, he said. But the truth is, I've been acting for a long time, just not visibly. I understood. Emotional distance, confessions whispered to the wrong person, the slow redirection of intimacy. None of it left marks, yet all of it altered trajectories. I don't want to hurt anyone, he added. Someone always gets hurt, I said, not accusing, just stating what felt inevitable. Daniel looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in his composure gave way. He reached out, not abruptly, not urgently, but with deliberation, resting his hand over mine. The contact was simple, restrained, and utterly destabilizing. "This is where I stop pretending," he said quietly. I didn't pull away. That was the choice, small in motion, enormous in consequence. The line we had discussed so carefully blurred not through passion, but through consent, two adults acknowledging what had been true long before this moment. What followed was unhurried and careful, as though we were both aware that speed would cheapen the weight of it. There was no illusion of escape, no fantasy of beginnings untouched by complication. Just the undeniable intimacy of being chosen, even briefly. Afterward, Daniel leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, his breathing uneven. The room felt altered, as if it would remember what had happened even after we left it. "This changes things," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "It already has." Guilt arrived quickly for him. I saw it settle in his posture, the way his shoulders tightened, the way his hand slipped from mine as if burned by realization. "I can't make this your burden," he said. "You didn't ask for the situation I'm in." "I still chose it," I replied, though the words felt thinner than before. The sound of a phone vibrating broke the silence. Daniel glanced at the screen, then turned it face down without answering. I didn't need to see the name to know who it was. "That's the difference between us," I said softly. "When someone calls you, it's never just for you." Daniel closed his eyes. "I know." I stood, pulling my jacket on with movements that felt automatic, protective. Staying would have meant pretending this was sustainable. Leaving hurt, but it preserved something essential. At the door, Daniel stopped me. "I don't regret you," he said. "But I regret that I don't know how to do this without breaking something." I met his gaze, steady despite the ache settling into my chest. "Then figure it out," I said. "Because I won't live in the space between your choices." As I walked away, I understood that crossing a line didn't end the story, it sharpened it. What came next would demand decisions neither of us could postpone, and the cost of delay was already rising. The distance I put between Daniel Reed and myself was intentional, but it was not clean. Days passed without messages, then weeks, and in that silence I learned how loud absence could be. I replayed everything, not to romanticize it, but to understand where choice had ended and consequence had begun. Daniel broke the quiet first. He didn't call. He sent a single line. "Marcus knows." We met in a small cafe far from his apartment, a neutral space chosen for its anonymity. Daniel arrived late, looking older than I remembered, as though truth had accelerated time. He sat across from me without ordering anything, his hands clasped tightly together. "I didn't plan to tell him the way it happened," he said. "But I couldn't keep lying once I realized I was lying to everyone, including myself." I didn't ask how Marcus found out. The specifics didn't matter. What mattered was that the secret no longer belonged to just the two of us. "He wasn't angry at first," Daniel continued. "Just disappointed. That was worse." I believed him. Disappointment carried a finality anger often lacked. "What happens now?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "We're separating. Not because of you alone. Because this forced us to say things we avoided for years." The relief I felt was brief and uncomfortable. I didn't want to be the catalyst for collapse, even if the structure had already been unstable. I told him everything, Daniel added. "Not details, but the truth." "That it mattered?" I asked. "Yes." We sat with that. Outside, people moved past the window unaware, untouched by the gravity of our small, private reckoning. "I won't ask you for anything," Daniel said at last. "I'm not in a position to offer something whole." "I know," I replied. And I meant it, not with resignation, but with clarity. What I didn't say was that I had already chosen myself in the weeks of silence. That waiting had taught me the cost of being someone's unresolved question. "This ends here," I said gently. Not because it wasn't real, but because I won't build my life on the fragments of someone else's. Daniel nodded, his eyes shining with something like gratitude and grief intertwined. "You're stronger than I was at your age," he said. I stood, ready to leave. At the door, I turned back once. "I hope you learn to be alone before you learn to be honest with someone new." He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. Some truths landed only after departure. Months later, I heard through mutual distance that Daniel had moved out, that Marcus had started over in another city. There were no dramatic endings, no vindication. just lives adjusting around what could no longer be denied. As for me, I carried the experience not as a wound, but as a lesson, about timing, about desire, about the quiet strength it took to walk away from something unfinished. Loving someone did not entitle me to their unresolved life, and being chosen secretly was not the same as being chosen fully. Sometimes I still think of Daniel Reed, not as my teacher, not even as my lover, but as the man who taught me the most difficult lesson of all, that clarity is kinder than longing, and integrity, once claimed, must be defended. The story didn't end with us together. It ended with me knowing who I was, and refusing to disappear inside someone else's uncertainty.